I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 460. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week this week. For those of you who are returning, who have listened previously, welcome back. Glad to have you here. Those of you who are new, welcome aboard. Hope you will stick around. Hope you will check out the back catalog of 459 previous episodes and all the various and sundry stuff we have available. Glad to have you here. I want to also thank the members of the Reformation Gun Club who make this show possible. Folks, we are listener funded. That means we don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. This is made possible by the good folks who put their money where their mouth is because they value what we do and enjoy it, and they want to see it continue. And they are members of the Reformation Gun Club, and they contribute, they donate through Give, Send, Go. Any amount that you want to donate is appreciated. It helps us keep the lights on and keep us going. And if you would like to be one of those awesome people, and if you would like to join them, visit armedlutheran.us/gun club or gun club or reformationgunclub.com, or you can look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. One of the perks is our monthly online hangouts. Didn't get to do one in August. It will happen in September. Part of the reason it didn't happen in August was because of work-related stuff. I have projects that I've been working on that created all kinds of havoc recently, and one of those is finally coming to a head next weekend. Hopefully things slow down after that, and things get back to some semblance of normal, whatever that is. We shall see. Hopefully we will get together with the Reformation Gun Club in September. That's the plan. And if you would like to join them and come hang out with some awesome people and shoot the breeze, talk about whatever is on your mind in the world of guns and politics and whatever else, adult beverages, sign up today. reformationgunclub.com. Look for a link in the show notes. Stop me if you've heard this before. A trans person went into a Christian school and shot a bunch of kids. We've all heard that before. Nashville and the Covenant School in Nashville comes to mind most recently, but there are plenty of other examples of violence committed by the trans cult. And there are some striking similarities between Nashville and the Covenant school shooting and the shooting at the Catholic school in Minneapolis this week. Even discredited former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe was able to point out all the eerie similarities between those two shootings. All the similarities except for one, the most obvious, that both shooters were trans, and apparently both of them hated Christians. And the media and the left, which are basically the same thing at this point, have spent every minute since the Minneapolis shooting trying to blame everything except for the radical anti-science, anti-religion, Marxist death cult that is the trans movement. You see, trans can't grow through normal biological means. So you have to grow the base, to grow the quote unquote community, you have to indoctrinate kids to be the next generation of the trans cult. And indoctrinating a whole generation of kids into this cultish ideology was always going to have negative downstream effects. And we've talked about this on the show in the past. Because the self-loathing that is at the core of that ideology that motivates kids to buy in, but then when the life-altering surgeries and the drugs kick in, that self-loathing then turns to regret. And if you dump a bunch of wrong sex hormones and antidepressant drugs into the developing brains of already unstable kids, it's really not a shock that they turn to hate and murder or suicide. The damage that we are doing through this insane ideology to an entire generation of kids is absolutely unconscionable. Kids and their worried parents are lied to, told that their child was born in the wrong body, as though God made some kind of mistake. You know, we used to recognize that some men, some boys are more feminine. Some girls are more masculine. We used to call those girls tomboys. And generally, for the most part, those kids either grow out of that or they turn out to be gay. One or the other. They're not trans. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a trans child. But those God-believing hicks and hayseeds, they're just a bunch of evil, hateful bigots because we refuse to accept and affirm this new crazy false reality that they've created. They've destroyed the God-created binary and replaced it with a man-made galaxy of infinite genders. And rather than lash out at the people who pushed them down this dark road, their parents, the doctors, the medical community, the media, entertainers, these damaged children turn against the people who saw them and loved them for who they were before so-called science turned them into murderous Frankenstein monsters. And yet, people like Jen Psaki and that soy boy mayor of Minneapolis and Gavin Newsom and plenty of others are out raging about, not about protecting schools, not about the transgender and cult and its dangers and the danger of doing these things to children, but as always, they're raging about guns. The AR-15 specifically. The AR-15 that apparently can fire 30 clips and associated magazines, as the mayor of Minneapolis puts it. Democrats are twisting themselves into pretzels to avoid mentioning the trans issue, or they're defending the so-called trans community. The trans community that is approximately 0.01% of the general public, most of whom are depressed and mentally ill or confused kids who are being led by depraved groomers and sickos who get their sexual kicks by cross-dressing. This is not a gun problem, and it never has been. This is an evil problem. It is a mental health problem. I say, I know, radical idea this, we should classify reclassify gender dysphoria, transgenderism as a whole, as a mental disorder and ban those people who suffer from it from owning firearms. And I know there are people out here who are going to say, oh, shall not be infringed. All right, we're already being infringed. We've talked about this in the past. I have discussed this in the past. If your shall not be infringed stance is that we should allow violent felons to have firearms, or that we should allow the mentally ill to have firearms, you're as crazy as they are, and I disagree with you wholeheartedly. I've seen it jokingly put that we should just stop Democrats from getting guns, and then 90% of the violent crime in America would stop. And there's some truth in that. It's a little simplistic. It's kind of funny when you see it in a meme, but it's funny because there's a kernel of truth to it. Because it's not NRA members, it's not your average American gun owner who's out doing these things. It's gangbangers in the inner city for the most part, and apparently now crazy leftists. We talked about the rise of violence on the left that has happened since Trump first came into office. The shooter in Minneapolis had 3 guns, only one of which was an AR-15, which, by the way, all 3 of which were covered in scrawling writings about hating Christians and hating Trump and hating God. But this guy, it's a guy. I'm not. When you start killing people, your pronouns go out the window. I don't give a crap what your pronouns were. I didn't give a crap before. I definitely don't give a crap now that you've killed people. So, for those who are all, panties in a bunch because we're not respecting the pronouns, screw you. The pronouns are out the window when you become a murderer, especially a mass murderer. This guy had a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. He left behind a manifesto of hate and self-loathing. He drew himself in his journal, standing at a mirror with an AR-15 slung over his shoulder, and in the mirror staring back at him was not his own face, but the face of a demon. This was a very deeply disturbed person. So, tell me how banning the AR-15 would have stopped him, especially since he had 2 other guns that could easily have caused as much damage. And someone with this much hate, even if you were somehow to magically ban all guns, which is never going to happen, do you really think this person is going to not find a way to do something similar, even without a gun? I would argue that he definitely would. Well, there are more guns in this country than there are people, they say. We should ban all guns. I have a better idea. How about we ban transgender medical procedures for minors nationwide? And we start putting in prison every doctor who is involved in this awful death cult. Meanwhile, our elites in society are fighting tooth and nail to ignore the obvious mental illness problem that infects this segment of the population, this tiny percentage of the population. Private Christian schools, even, we have seen an increase in violence against Christian institutions, against churches. I think the number is something like a 2-fold increase or maybe a 3-fold increase in violence against schools. I think I've seen somewhere, I tried to find this before I recorded. I know Fox was showing some numbers. It looked like double since 2018, but I've seen somewhere else a number that it's like a 200 or 300% increase since 2018. If that's not correct, please post the numbers, but it's a huge increase in violence against Christians. And in the state of Minnesota, private Christian schools begged the governor, Tim Walz. You remember Tim Walz? Tampon Tim, the guy that Kamala Harris thought was a great choice for vice president, the guy who made it a priority of his administration to put tampons in boys' bathrooms in Minnesota public schools. That guy. Christian schools begged him at a time when the state had an $18 billion surplus to set aside some money for security at private schools, but he did nothing. Democrats in Minnesota, people like Tim Walz, have bragged about making Minnesota a refuge for transgenderism. And now the innocent people of Minnesota are reaping those consequences. It's sort of like making cities these refuges for illegal aliens, and then you get this massive illegal alien crime, and everyone's shocked that this kind of stuff would happen. Well, you're kind of reaping what you sow. But unfortunately, the people who pay are not the people in government. The people who pay for the mistakes of politicians, the dumb ideas of politicians, the pandering of politicians to a tiny minority, the people who pay are the innocent, everyday Americans, not the political elites. You want to stop shootings like this? Here's an idea. Like I said, make gender dysphoria and transgenderism a mental illness again. It was before. It should be again. And bar those people from owning firearms. Now, the guns this guy got were purchased legally. So he filled out on a Form 4473 that he wasn't mentally ill, but he clearly was. He had never, I don't think, had ever been adjudicated mentally ill, meaning determined to be mentally ill by a court or by a doctor, or had ever been confined in a mental institution. So if you treat transgenderism, gender dysphoria, the way it should be treated, as a mental disorder, stop pandering and catering to it and trying to treat it as though it's normal, you could cut down on some of these problems. And he probably could still have gotten the guns illegally. Yeah, I agree. I agree in some respects. It's not like the 4473 stops people necessarily. I'm sure there are some who it affects. It's just look at Hunter Biden. It doesn't stop people from buying a gun. It only allows you to prosecute them later after they've already done something terrible. But you might say, well, he could still have gotten his guns illegally. And we've made that sort of point on the show before, that the idea that if you ban guns you stop innocent people from getting guns, you're not going to stop violence, because people who commit these kinds of crimes will still find a way to get guns illegally. But if that's your argument, that we shouldn't do it because they'll still get their guns illegally, maybe you should stop and listen to your argument. We should make it illegal for mentally ill. We should not make it illegal for mentally ill trans people to get guns, because they could just get them illegally anyway. Okay, whatever. We shouldn't make it illegal because they'll just get it. It's sort of like saying, well, we shouldn't make murder illegal because people will just murder anyway. Sure. Okay. Whatever. If that's your argument, you might want to try a little harder. But it is true that people won't be deterred by the fact that it's illegal. It's not going to necessarily stop people. It will allow us to arrest people who might be planning such crimes. But I don't see people like this shooter in Minneapolis, especially since he's assumed room temperature. But I mean, people like the shooter, I don't see them heading down to the hood and asking Riri for a gat. I mean, it's not something that they might ask a friend to acquire a firearm for them, which is already illegal. So putting it on the 4473, making it illegal, not going to stop anything necessarily. It's just going to allow us to prosecute those who break that law, maybe hopefully before they buy a gun. And if you put it on the 4473 and a person comes to the store, I mean, you can kind of tell the trans people who they are. And if a gun store is suspicious that the gun they just sold to a guy named Robert, who presents himself as Robin, you maybe call the authorities and do a little checking. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you could also possibly, you still have the potential for friends to get guns for them. Like I said, already illegal. He could steal it from his parents. Again, illegal. Kind of like the kid from Newtown did when he killed his mom and stole her guns. But at the same time, I don't think necessarily that's all that great an issue, because the same people like his politician dad who fought against limiting transgender medical procedures for kids, people like his parents are most likely anti-gun as well. I'm not suggesting for a minute here that we can prevent violence just by denying purchases to transgenders. I'm not suggesting that by simply putting something on a Form 4473 that we're going to stop violent crime. We might be able to prevent some crimes before they happen because the suspicion, but we've also gotten ourselves in a place in this society where, we can't be profiling people because that's just wrong. But again, I don't think that's going to stop every crime committed by violent, crazy trannies, but it's a step. It's certainly better than going out and infringing on the fundamental rights of 300 million Americans. I suggest maybe we narrow the focus a bit to that tiny fraction of the population that are possibly dangerous because they're mentally ill and predisposed to anger and hate. It'd be nice if we'd stop pandering to that community, quote unquote community, the community of 0.01% of the public. It's funny, if someone attacks a synagogue, we blame anti-Semitism. If someone attacks a mosque, we're all up in arms about Islamophobia. But when somebody attacks a church, if somebody attacks a Christian school, then the ideology of the person doesn't matter, apparently. Especially if the ideology happens to align with a particular group that gives large amounts of money to Democrats or is a voting base. The guns are what we've got to go after whenever someone attacks a church or attacks Christians. We got to ignore the ideology in that case. It's odd how that works. The left often, you've probably seen it, they scoff if you suggest that Christians in this country are threatened or persecuted. I mentioned earlier that crazy increase in violence and attacks against Christians and Christian institutions and churches, something like 400%, 300 or 400% over the last 10 years. But consider some of their responses on the left to this church shooting. These same people who would scoff at the idea that Christians are persecuted or under threat. Gavin Newsom, JB Pritzker, fat boy in Illinois, the soy boy mayor of Minneapolis, major lefty media talking heads like Joe Scarborough, even so-called Republicans are now openly mocking prayer. On social media, you see people openly cheering the murder of children because, in their words, those children won't grow up to become intolerant bigots because they're now dead, and that's good. These lefties complaining about religion, complaining about prayer, complaining about church, hating God, they don't realize they don't really have a problem with religion or with God. Well, they have a problem with God, capital G God. They don't have a problem with religion so long as it conforms to their wants and desires. because essentially the left has its own religion. We often talk on this show about how, especially when we're referring to some of the more left-leaning churches in this country, that they've replaced God with government. And I think that's somewhat accurate, but I would say it's more accurate to say that they've replaced God with self. They are God now, lowercase g. The government is merely their church. Politicians are their high priests. They don't hate religion, they hate Christians. They hate Christ. They hate the God of the Bible. They want a God that affirms their sin and says, you do you, because you and your wants and your desires are the most important thing in the world. And those who don't agree are hateful, dangerous bigots, and we should shoot their children so they don't grow up to be just like their parents. If your argument is that Christians, because Christians are not supposedly the majority in this country, that we are not persecuted or we are not under threat, maybe you're a Christian yourself and you don't believe that. Maybe you should stop and look at the facts. Sure, we're not being thrown to lions. We're not being burned at the stake or crucified like the Romans and like Nero did, lighting the streets of Rome with human candles, essentially. But you don't get a whole lot of sympathy from the left in this country when Christians are killed in brutal and awful ways by protected members of the Rainbow Coalition. Just think of how people responded to the death of the children at Camp Mystic here in Texas when the floods washed them away and killed over 130 people. Well, it was a Christian camp. No big deal. It's a good thing that they're gone. They won't grow up to be bigots like their parents. That's generally the response. This country is in a very, very dire and dangerous place. Because on the one hand, the biggest underlying problem is that we don't have a shared set of values. And the values that are instilled in us by our religious faith transcend your own needs and desires and wants, and they make us a better person and better societies. And when you throw that out the window and everyone has their own sense of what is right and what is just and what is moral, we face a very dangerous future. And I expect we're going to see a lot more of what we saw in Minneapolis in the future. But, dear listener, be not afraid. God is in control. And in the end, those who have faith in him and believe in his word, not the word of lefty Christians, but the words of the Bible, our reward is waiting for us in heaven. The Lord never said we were going to have it easy here on earth. We would suffer, especially we would suffer for his sake. And our reward is waiting for us after death, not here on earth. But that doesn't mean we should let our guard down and let things just happen. So be vigilant. I am encouraged that the Justice Department is going to be spending $100 million. I think it was $100 million. Might have been with a B, might have been billion, as grants to religious institutions to help beef up security against these threats. If you are someone who has not, if you're a member of a church who hasn't actually sat down and thought about the threats facing Christian institutions and actually sat down and considered church security, And that doesn't necessarily always mean members of your congregation carrying guns to church. That doesn't hurt, but it also means things like being vigilant. It means keeping an eye on doors, locking doors. It means cameras. It means keeping an eye on those who might be suspicious. So, in my thoughts and prayers and deepest sympathies go out to the victims of this latest transgender violent crime. And I hope that American churches particularly, wake up to the threat that they face and start thinking seriously about additional security and ways to protect your property and your congregation, your students, from the hatred that this world has for you because they hate God first. If you have any questions or any comments about anything I ranted about here today, please visit the feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Keep shooting. Keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.